630 WMAL.
6:37 on the Morning Majority. Brian Neiman and Mary Walter in this morning. Dr. WALID PHARES joins us now, Fox News contributor and author of the book, The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East. Dr. PHARES, good to have you again. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today.
There's a lot to talk about, as always, when it comes to the Middle East. Let's start off in Libya. Can you tell us what you think about these rebels and how much the United States should trust the rebels and whether or not we should be arming them and supporting them?
Well, since day one, I analyzed, the rhetoric, the narrative of the rebels, their statements, and in the final analysis, it's a combined force whereby on the surface, first layer, you have former bureaucrats who are leading it, people who were in the regime, broke away from the regime, and formed the Interim National Council. With them, also in that first layer, you have former officers of the Libyan armed forces, including some in the special forces and on. And added to them, you have a number of dissidents. Not many, because most of the dissidents are, as you know, abroad, but they support the council. That's layer one. Below layer one, you have a very thick layer, which is now emerging and, subject of concern, of many Islamist militias, Islamist groups. Those whom you see mostly on TV footage, with non-military cars transformed into, militia cars, and the footage on Al Jazeera and elsewhere indicate the presence of heavy Islamist/jihadist groupings.
All right, let me ask you about what do you think Gaddafi is going to do? There's some reporting that maybe people within the inner circle are going to defect. Maybe even his sons are talking to other people. Do you think Gaddafi would ever just throw his hands up and try to make a deal, or do you think he's going to hunker down and fight this out to the end?
At this point in time, if I'm in a war room of Gaddafi, I wouldn't have a reason to defect. I mean, there is a balance of power that has been established. The rebels almost reached Tripoli a few weeks ago, then they were pushed back, reminding us of World War II, by the way, all the way to Benghazi. Then Gaddafi forces were pushed back somewhere before Sirte, and the battlefield now looks more like World War I, meaning no one is able to defeat the other side. So if I am in Gaddafi's camp, I would say I would settle for what it is right now, hoping that on the long run I will, weaken my resistance. If I'm the rebels, I will try to consolidate where I am. So I don't think at this point in time either one of those camps is going to crumble.
Now, what happens if Gaddafi stays in power? Obama said we're not looking for regime change. We're not going to facilitate regime change. But how can he stay there and govern effectively? And what happens? Because he looks like he's going to stay. What happens there then?
Well, if if you analyze it, you see that there is no more regime to stay or to go. It looks more to me like Somalia or Afghanistan before the Taliban took over, in the sense that it is now two pieces of Libya. Both are governed, practically speaking, by sort of militias, upgraded in the east to interim government and downgraded in the west from government to large militias. So short of a massive force entering Libya, stabilizing it, and organizing elections, we're going to see more of the same, unfortunately.
All right, before we got into Libya, obviously Egypt was on everybody's mind, and everybody was worried about, how that country would go. What are you hearing the latest when it comes to the future government of Egypt, and whether or not it would fall into the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood?
Although in the first days, I would say even weeks of the revolt that was supposed to become a democratic revolution in Egypt, you had the youth element, the laptop people, the middle class, some labor union being at the heart of the demonstration. Actually, they had the highest numbers. It seems now clearly that the Muslim Brotherhood, the most organized, the most centralized, backed by the regional Muslim Brotherhood and their petrodollars, are on the rise. They are the single most organized and influential political group. What worries me the most in the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood is the fact that they are exerting some political influence over the armed forces. The latest statements made by the foreign minister of the current cabinet appointed by the military council are worrisome to me. He said that we're going to re-engage with Iran, we're going to open up to Hamas, we're going to receive a delegation of Hezbollah. So certainly the Muslim Brotherhood now have the upper hand in Egypt at this point in time.
In Syria, I find this to be fascinating, and maybe the Muslim Brotherhood and what's going on in Egypt is the reason why. But all of a sudden in Syria, both the U.S. and even Israel saying, "Hey, Bashar Assad may be not that bad of a guy." Secretary of State Hillary Clinton called him a reformer. Do you see him as a reformer? And what would happen if he goes?
Well, Bashar al-Assad's regime and his father's regime were, first of all, responsible for decades and decades of bloody oppression against the Syrian people, of occupation of Lebanon, of supporting Hezbollah and its wars with the Israelis, of a linkage to the Iranian regime, of killing our soldiers by letting jihadists crossing the border into Iraq, on and on and on.
Right.
I mean, the bloody history of Assad, you can't have any advocacy for this regime. And I think that what has started in Syria is not going to be reversible anymore. Short term or medium term, I don't know, but it's not going to be reversible.
Well, but how can we call him a reformer, and how can we try and say, hey, we don't want him to leave power then?
Well, I think that Mrs. Clinton made that statement based, of course, on the advisors, and you know how the advisors of the State Department, the administration, and then she realized that, and I think yesterday, I'm not sure, it's to be confirmed, she made another statement that wasn't exactly what she meant. She meant that congressional, leaders went to Syria. She put it, in the language of congressional people said so, not her.
We hear the terms freedom, democracy, rebels being tossed around, and as Americans, we automatically tend to think that that's good. Oh, these are freedom fighters; they're fighting for democracy. But ultimately, are they really looking for the same type of freedom that we see as freedom, and the same type of democracy that we equate democracy with?
See, we begin our analysis with the they. There is no one single they. There are multiple theys, and as I argued in my book, The Coming Revolution, as you know, which was published before these revolutions, what we're seeing today is a race between two global groups vying for, power or the control of the Middle East. On the one hand, the rise of civil societies, and those people, indeed, want freedom, want democracy, not so well organized, not so well educated sometimes on these issues, have not practiced it before. But still, these are the guys we'd like to see coming to power through elections, on the one hand. And then the very powerful, well-established, better funded group who are the jihadists, who are using democracy and freedom and change to establish worse than the authoritarian regimes that existed before. And there is a race between those two forces.
Dr. Phares, always good to have you on the show. Thanks very much for coming on, and we appreciate your insights as always.